So this session is on governance. We're going to shift a little bit away from agriculture to try to, I think about what is happening to the region so that we can think about policies again. I mean, clearly, the recent changes that have been ongoing are historical and very big, and it is hard to understand them in real time. But clearly, they will affect policies and politics and economics in some big ways, which we don't yet fully understand. And so I think I, as an economist, I've been really having a hard time thinking about what kind of proper advice to give to governments at this point. In the past, advice may have been misused, and right now, I mean, we've heard a lot this morning about various ideas of Marshall Plan or decentralization or focus on this and that. It seems to me it's going to be important to try to understand the politics of the moment before we can start thinking about what may work in the next phase. This little caricature, I thought, speaks very loud about the uncertainty of the moment. What I want to do, and unfortunately, as an economist, I have to try to tackle political issues right now because just of my own kind of way of trying to come to terms with what's going on. So you'll have to bear with me and hear about politics. I want to think about the model that has been used, the political economy model that's been used in the past 20 years to understand the Arab region, what's been called the autocratic bargain or the elite bargain. I want to show you that I'm not very satisfied with the way this model explains the past or predicts the future. I want to propose a variant of it and see if that can help us understand things a little bit better. There are many questions really unanswered on these revolutions. We need to think about them in a more rational manner, and yet it's not very clear why they came now and not when, say, the economies were liberalized in the early 90s, why they started in Tunisia and Egypt, which, as we heard this morning, were doing relatively well, and what really explains the contagion in the region. Is it nationalism again, or are the root causes of what has happened somewhat similar in different countries, and if so, why? Now, I don't really want to review the literature on transitology, but it's huge because lots of the parts of the world moved towards democracy over time. So there are literatures on Latin America that moved in the 80s together with economic liberalization, on Africa that moved in the 90s after some economic shocks and the fall of the Soviet Union, which again is another domino effect with lots of countries moving. And the Middle East and North Africa has been considered as exceptional, and there's a literature that tries to explain why they are exceptional. Part of it is Islam. I'm surprised we haven't talked about Islam at all today yet. I mean, after all, we are going to have Islamic parties governing Tunisia, Egypt, Kuwait, Morocco, and probably other countries soon. We should probably also invite a broader audience from now on to have a richer conversation. But there's been some debates about the democratic paradox. Would a religious group that win democratically respect the democracy after? And it's interesting that similar debates have happened in Europe earlier. I mean, indeed, the Christian parties that joined constitutional governments in the late 1800s gave rise to kind of similar worries and similarly after World War II. But so this is possibly not really anything exceptional in the region. It's just an exceptional moment. Let me go quickly to the autocratic bargain, give you a few sense of this model that's been used and perhaps abused in the past. The idea is that in the Arab region, perhaps because of France, there is a deal between an elite and the citizens where the citizens give up political rights against something that the elite or the autocrat is delivering, economic security. My paper, and the literature is based on game theory, but I don't want to go over technicalities. I think simple graphs explain things better. The autocratic deal is one where the autocrat delivers to the citizens a bundle of economic and social policies that is good enough to prevent the citizens from rebelling, from taking over violently, if you like. And so the kind of equilibria that you get is that the bundle is good enough to prevent a rebellion or to have rebellions with very low probabilities. One of the implications of the model is that when the economics become more difficult, more scarce, the autocrat gives up and opens up more political space, for example. And this is well-established literature. Now, does that really explain, is it a useful model to explain the past? It's not clear why the revolutions or the awakening would happen now. There's been no recent change in economics, no cut in subsidies. We speak about the youth bulge, but really it's not new. 20 years ago, the youth bulge was larger, and employment's been high for very long. Let me show you some graphs. Just focus on the top line. The top line is government spending in the Arab region on average across countries from the, from the 60s to today. And you see the big fall starts in, it's from 1982. So it starts in the 80s, and it bottoms up in the early 90s. So really, the economic shock, if you like, came in the early 90s. Why is it that it took 25 years for people to rebel? I think it's an important question. This is another very interesting graph based on a recent database from International Human Rights Group. The two lines represent the top one, it's political rights, and the bottom one is repression, political repression. Both are, as you can see, falling throughout the period, and the Arab region was one of the regions with the least political rights and the highest level of repression. Down means more repression for the dark blue line. So very high level of repression right before the revolutions. Now, again, an autocratic bargain model does not predict high repression, quite the opposite. It's a model where autocrats manage to prevent violence and manage to govern by providing the economic goods that satisfy the people. And so something else must be happening so that repression is so high and political rights don't increase as the economy goes down, as I showed you in the previous graph. So what is it? Other questions. This is a graph from IFPRI, which is complicated to see from where you're sitting, but it basically depicts from the Gallup poll the percentage of people dissatisfied with their standard of living, and on the horizontal axis GDP per capita. You would see that in the Arab world, the two countries where dissatisfaction is least are Egypt and Tunisia, where the revolution started. So again, one wonders, is it simple dissatisfaction according to the autocratic bargain model? This is unemployment in Egypt, comparing the blue line, 1998, the red line, 2006. You can see that this is by age of the population, that actually unemployment has not come up. Actually, the unemployment of youth has always been very high since 98. It went down a little bit recently. So there are no easy explanation. And therefore, I want to offer this modified autocratic bargain model, which may help us think better about the future. It's a model with three players rather than with two players. You have the autocrat, you have something I'm calling the soft belly. It's a group that is allied with the autocrat, but the alliance is not necessarily very strong. And then there is the rest of society, which is in opposition. And so there is an autocratic bargain between the autocrat and the soft belly. And there is the repression of the rest of society. And one can show that this can be a proper equilibrium with low probability of rebellion being successful. Now, why is this an interesting model? Because I think it depicts a society that is more like our society, which is a somewhat divided society, and so this divide and rule type equilibrium. We can think of the soft belly as the liberal, social liberals in society, and remember, many of our autocrats have their legitimacy based on a modernist state where liberal thinking is very important, but also the minorities in some countries, the merchant class, who are basically stay with the autocrat out of a fear of the majority, the tyranny of the majority. And so it's an equilibrium based on fear, and not just on delivering goods to the citizens, economic goods, but rather it's a little bit of goods, but also the fear of a majority rule that make them back the autocrats. And the autocrat compensates them at particular times, in particular when they start talking to the opposition, and that becomes dangerous for the autocrat, with subsidies. And this, in my mind, explained the rise of the subsidies. Here you can see over time subsidies in Egypt, not just grain, we talked about grain, but mostly petroleum, and this is the incidence of these subsidies mostly going to the rich, actually, which do constitute in many ways the soft belly that I've been talking about. So the dynamics of that system over time include push and pull factors and economic and non-economic factors, in particular for that soft belly. So think about the soft belly as being pushed away.
You have 2 minutes, but I will give you 4.
2 minutes, okay. So basically pushed away from the autocratic bargain by the decay and the corruption of the system, and pulled into an alliance with the opposition, very much in my analysis through the rise of middle class, business class, which becomes in many ways the bastion of political Islam and helps it moderate itself, so it becomes much less scary. And it's this push away from the autocrat and pull towards the opposition that really, in my mind, constitutes the revolutionary moment. Part of it, so the push and pull, the push is the performance of the Arab crony capitalism has been extremely poor. Big companies have received preferential treatment, made lots of profits, but in reality invested little and did not create a lot of jobs. They engage in capital flight. It's not clear why. This has to be studied much more carefully, but most likely they were afraid of political instability and high political risk, and the regime were very unable to regulate their capitalism, say the way in which East Asia did, where again big firms were advantaged, but they also had incentives to invest in growth. Most credit went to large firms, and they didn't deliver the jobs. So therefore the soft belly, as I call it, has a choice of a democratic option with political Islam. And for me, the revolutionary moment I propose is when that equation shifted and it became more interesting to create a democratic option with the opposition. So that's the revolutionary moment. I think this model explained Tunisia and Egypt first better, because there is a strong middle class and there's more credibility that the liberal part of society and the political Islamic part of society could work together. You know, they are in the same families, they are part of that growing middle class. There are also other issues of pull and pull, which I show in the paper, are normal or luxury goods, such as dignity, related to foreign relations, for example. I think this model explains nicely the regional contagion also, because the pull and push factors are in many ways regional. The corruption of Arab capitalism is pretty regional. It's the same way of doing business that was imported from the rich Khalij, where the big money interests learned to do business in a certain way and exported it to the rest of the region. I think it was very much supported by political repression, so that created rents to the insiders. And on the pull side, the moderation of political Islam is also pretty much a regional, indeed a global phenomena. So that equation shifts pretty much at the same time everywhere, but it has to be discovered because this information is not out. It's discovered in for this autocratic bargain based on liberal values. The situation obviously in the other country is different. If I had time, I could argue that this is also a useful model. On implications for policy, I will not take time simply because really I don't know the implications. I've been thinking through. One thing that hits me is, of course, the importance of the political. The most important thing right now is to stabilize, to consolidate the new orders. It's absolutely unique to have liberals and political Islamists together as one political settlement. Now, of course, Islamists have won everywhere. For that system to be balanced in the future, the liberals have to rebuild themselves. And there are all kinds of issues involved in stabilizing the politics. I'm going to stop there and not venture into the capital, into the economic implication. But I think there are economic issues that one can think about in that framework. Thank you.